My name is Clara Whitman, and I am 19 years old. On Christmas Eve, my stepdad smashed a glass into my face, and my own mother watched me bleed. She did not run to help me. She did not even hand me a towel. She just looked away as if my pain was inconvenient. That night, the world I had been holding together with both hands shattered into pieces, just like the glass on the floor. The next morning, with stitches still burning in my cheek, I cut $280,000 and walked away from that house forever. What would you do if the people who were supposed to protect you turned violent and used you until there was nothing left? That is the question I keep asking myself as I replay that night over and over. I grew up believing that family meant sacrifice. I thought loyalty meant you never said no, even when it hurt. For years, I believed that being strong meant carrying the weight for everyone else. But strength cannot survive endless betrayal. I poured not only my heart into that family, but also every dollar I earned. When I finally added it all up, it was over $280,000. Mortgage payments, utility bills, insurance premiums, credit card debt that was never mine, shopping sprees for my younger sister. I carried it all quietly because I thought that maybe if I gave enough, they would finally see me. Instead, they saw me as an endless bank account. They never once saw me as a daughter. I want you to picture this. It is Christmas Eve in San Antonio. The house smells of roasted ham and cinnamon candles. Lights sparkle across the neighborhood. Families are laughing and exchanging gifts. In our living room, there are relatives from Dallas and Houston neighbors dropping by with plates of cookies, even our church friend Mr. Lopez, who always checks in. Laughter fills the air, but underneath it, I feel the tension building like a storm. My stepdad Frank is drinking his words already sharp, his movements heavy. My mom Carol smiles at the guests, pretending nothing is wrong, while my sister Vanessa shows off her new Coach purse that cost $500. I brought only a tray of cookies I bought with my cafe paycheck. My contribution is invisible compared to her luxuries, even though everyone in that room has been surviving off my labor. And then it happens. Frank demands that I cover another $1,200 for a debt he racked up. I say no. For the first time in years, I say no. The room goes silent. His face twists with rage. The glass in his hand explodes against my skin before I can even move. The pain is instant hot blinding. Blood runs down my face onto my sweater. The gasps around me sound distant, muffled by the rush in my ears. I stumble, the world spinning. My mother does not move. She does not even whisper my name. She only says, "Stop being dramatic. Do not ruin Christmas." That sentence cuts deeper than the glass ever could. Imagine being 19, standing in a room full of people, your face bleeding, your mother turning away. That was the moment I knew. I was done being their provider. I was done being their silent sacrifice. And as I lay on that cold tile floor, I made a decision. If they wanted my money more than my life, then they would soon have neither. I would take back my future. I would stop the endless giving. I would walk away. Have you ever felt used by the people you trusted most? Share your story in the comments because I need to know I am not alone in this. I grew up on the south side of San Antonio, where the summers were brutally hot and the winters felt colder inside our drafty little house than they ever did outside. My earliest memories are not of laughter or bedtime stories, but of trying to make myself useful. My dad, my real dad, was a construction worker. His name was Mark Whitman. He died when I was only 7 in a construction accident on a site outside Austin. The company called it an accident, a collapsed scaffold that gave way without warning, but to me, it felt like the ground beneath our entire family gave way. My mom, Carol, changed overnight from a tired but affectionate woman into someone who seemed to view the world as a battlefield. She carried grief like a weight strapped to her chest, and she did not know how to love me through it. Instead of holding me closer, she pushed me away, saying I needed to be strong because she could not fall apart if I was weak. That was the beginning of the role I would play for the rest of my childhood, the responsible one, the strong one, the girl who handled everything so nobody else had to. 2 years after my dad's death, my mom remarried. She met Frank Dawson through a mutual friend at church. Frank was older, broad-shouldered with the kind of presence that filled a room. He worked as a construction foreman on large projects around Austin and San Antonio. At first, he seemed dependable, the kind of man who could steady a family after a tragedy. He bought me ice cream on our first outing and told me that every girl deserves a father who shows up. I wanted to believe him. I was desperate to believe that someone could make us whole again. For a short while, he did. We moved into a slightly bigger house on the edge of the Mission District, a place with peeling paint but a yard large enough for a swing set. Mom seemed lighter with Frank around, laughing again at barbecues and planning church events. But the shine wore off quickly. When I was 10, my half-sister Vanessa was born, Frank's daughter. From that moment forward, the entire household revolved around her. Vanessa was doted on like a princess. She had a nursery painted in soft pink with a brand new crib and toys stacked to the ceiling. As she grew older, she always had the newest clothes from North Star Mall, her own bedroom decorated with fairy lights and every gadget she asked for. When she was 10, she unwrapped an iPad on Christmas morning while I sat across the room holding a sweater from a clearance rack. Mom clapped her hands and Frank beamed at Vanessa as if she had cured cancer just by opening a box. My achievements never earned that kind of celebration. I brought home straight-A report cards and perfect attendance awards, but the response was always the same. A quick nod, a distracted "good job, kiddo." Then their attention snapped back to Vanessa, as though she were the sun and I was just a shadow in the corner. Frank's work injury changed everything. When I was 12, he was overseeing a crew on a downtown Austin site when a steel beam swung loose and slammed into his shoulder. He survived, but the damage left him unable to keep up with the demands of heavy labor. Within a year, he was laid off. He spiraled fast. The man who once strutted into the house in his work boots and dusty helmet now spent his days in a recliner with a beer can balanced on the armrest. The bitterness settled into him like rust on metal. He barked at my mom, snapped at me, and threw pity parties about how the world had betrayed him. He still demanded respect, but there was no respect left in the way he lived. Mom adjusted by coddling him even more and teaching me to tiptoe around his moods. She said Frank had been through enough and we needed to give him space. What she really meant was that it was my job to pick up the slack while pretending not to notice his failures. By the time I was 15, I was working part-time at a small grocery store on weekends. Not because I wanted extra spending money, but because my mom suggested it was time for me to help with family needs. Vanessa was enrolled in gymnastics classes that cost a fortune, and Frank's unemployment checks were barely stretching. I handed over my paychecks without argument. Mom praised me for being reliable. Frank grunted something about how real families pull together. I remember standing in my bedroom one night, staring at the envelope of cash I had earned from bagging groceries and mopping aisles, wondering what it would feel like to actually spend $1 on myself. I never found out. Every cent disappeared into the household, usually explained as gas money for Frank's truck or fees for Vanessa's activities. The older I got, the clearer the divide became. Vanessa was celebrated for every mediocre achievement. When she painted a sloppy picture in art class, it was framed in the living room. When I won a regional science fair, Mom barely looked up from her phone. Vanessa was given allowance money for doing nothing. I was expected to babysit her, clean the kitchen, mow the yard, and keep my grades flawless without complaint. If I ever asked why the rules were different, the answer was simple. You are stronger, Clara. She is sensitive. You can handle it. She needs more encouragement. That phrase haunted me through high school, whispered like a curse that turned me into a mule carrying everyone else's load. Frank's drinking grew heavier. Sometimes he would slam his fist on the table when bills arrived, shouting about how the system was rigged. Sometimes he threw empty bottles against the garage wall. I learned to read the signs in his face, the slump of his shoulders, the twitch in his jaw. Those signs told me whether the night would end with silence or with yelling. On bad nights, my mom would tell me not to provoke him. On worse nights, she would tell me to just go to my room and let him vent. But I was never fully safe. He liked to remind me that I was not his real daughter. He called me Mark's little reminder, as if my existence was an inconvenience that kept him from forgetting the man who came before. Yet even through all this, I tried to earn their love. I believed that if I just kept doing more, if I kept proving myself, maybe they would finally look at me the way they looked at Vanessa. I joined Honor Society, worked extra shifts, volunteered at the hospital. I filled out scholarship applications late into the night. Every success made me proud, but at home it barely registered. Mom would say that she expected nothing less from me. Frank would scoff that academics did not put food on the table. Vanessa would roll her eyes and complain that I was boring. Still, I kept pushing because hope is hard to kill when you are a child craving love. One memory sums it up better than any other. I was 12 the Christmas Vanessa got her first bike. It was shiny pink with streamers on the handlebars and a wicker basket tied to the front. Frank knelt beside her adjusting the training wheels, his face glowing with pride. Mom clapped as Vanessa squealed. I stood to the side, holding my report card with straight A's in every subject, waiting for someone to notice. Frank gave my shoulder a quick pat and said, "Keep it up, kiddo," before turning back to his princess. In that moment, I understood exactly where I stood in the Dawson household. I was the reliable one, the background worker. Vanessa was the star. Frank was the king in exile demanding tribute. And my mom was the loyal servant who defended them both, no matter the cost. That realization burned itself into me. It shaped every decision I would make until the night everything finally shattered. I carried that truth into adulthood like a stone in my pocket. Heavy but familiar. By the time I turned 18, I had already been conditioned to put myself last. When I got accepted into the nursing program at the University of Texas at San Antonio, I thought maybe things would shift. Maybe higher education would earn me respect. Instead, it became one more resource for them to exploit. I was the girl with a future, which meant I was the girl expected to fund theirs. That is the background of who I am. That is the soil from which my story grows. A house where love was conditional, where money spoke louder than care, where one daughter was adored and the other was tolerated only as long as she carried the weight. When I started nursing school at the University of Texas at San Antonio, I thought life might finally turn a corner. I was proud of my acceptance letter and even prouder that I had earned a partial scholarship. I dreamed of late nights in the library, surrounded by textbooks and study groups, not late nights listening to Frank rant about bills. I imagined myself stepping onto a campus filled with opportunity, not carrying the weight of a household that refused to stand on its own. But dreams and reality rarely match when you grow up in a family that sees you as their insurance policy. The first semester started with excitement. I found a tiny off-campus apartment near the Northwest Side, close enough to bike to class. The walls were thin and the carpet smelled faintly of mildew, but it was mine. I worked 20 hours a week at H-E-B Grocery, bagging groceries and stocking shelves. On weekends, I picked up shifts at a small cafe in Alamo Heights where the tips were better. I budgeted every dollar with precision, stretching ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches to cover gaps. My plan was simple: work enough to cover my own rent, utilities, and tuition fees that the scholarship did not cover. Focus on school. Build a future. That plan lasted exactly 2 months. One Thursday evening, my mom called while I was finishing a shift at H-E-B. Her voice was tight, almost rehearsed. "Clara, honey, the mortgage is behind. Frank is stressed out. Could you help this month?" It was presented as a small favor, temporary, just until they caught up. I remember sitting in the break room staring at the numbers in my checking account. I had exactly $1,200 saved for tuition books. That was the amount they needed. Against every instinct, I said yes. I told myself it was family, that families help each other, that it would only be once. It was never once. By the next month, the utilities were behind. Electricity, water, internet, all on the verge of shutoff. That was another $500. Then came the insurance premiums, $300. Then Frank's credit card, minimum $600. Then Vanessa's car repairs and shopping money, $400. The list kept growing like weeds in a yard nobody tends. At first, I tried to cover just the urgent items, telling myself it was temporary, but temporary became permanent. Within a year, my bank account was nothing but a conduit funneling money from my paychecks to their household. I kept spreadsheets. Maybe it was my way of proving to myself that it was real. Every payment, every transfer, every Venmo request was logged. Mortgage, $1,200. Utilities, $500. Insurance, $300. Frank's credit cards, $600. Vanessa's shopping and car, $400. That pattern repeated month after month. $35,000 a year. I told myself I was keeping receipts for tax reasons. Deep down, I knew I was collecting evidence. The worst part was the way they treated it as expected. There was no gratitude, no real acknowledgement. Frank would grunt thanks as if I were a service provider. Mom would pat my hand and say, "You are strong. Clara, you can handle it." Vanessa never even asked. She would wave her new phone or purse in my face, bragging to her friends online, while I wondered which of my bills I could postpone without wrecking my credit. Every time I opened my laptop to log another payment, I felt less like a daughter and more like an ATM programmed to spit out cash on demand. There were moments when I tried to push back. Once, when I was 20, I told Frank I could not cover both his credit card and the utilities in the same month. His face turned red and he slammed his fist on the table. He shouted that if I lived under his roof, even part-time, I owed him. I wanted to scream back that I had my own apartment that I was paying for 2 households that I was drowning. But the words stuck in my throat. Mom rushed to his side, scolding me for upsetting him. She told me not to provoke him, that he was under stress, that he had lost his job and his pride. Then she added the line that cut deepest. "You are strong, Clara. He cannot handle disappointment." That was her justification for every burden laid on me. My strength. As if strength was an infinite resource she could mine forever. Meanwhile, Vanessa floated above it all like royalty. She was given gas money clothes trips to North Star Mall. When she turned 16, she got a used Honda that I was expected to pay the insurance on. When she crashed it into a fence 2 months later, Frank barked at me to cover the repairs. I worked double shifts at the cafe to pay for damages I had no part in. Vanessa laughed about it later, telling her friends that accidents happen. She never knew the hours I spent wiping tables and carrying trays to make up for her recklessness. I began skipping meals to save money. I would pack crackers and a water bottle for long days on campus, telling classmates I was on a diet when really I could not afford lunch. At night, I counted tips with shaking hands, calculating how many bills I could cover. My body grew thin, my skin pale, but nobody at home noticed. Mom was busy praising Vanessa's art projects. Frank was busy nursing his beer. The only one who noticed was me staring into the bathroom mirror, wondering how long I could keep this up. One night, I broke down to my best friend Rachel. We sat in her apartment drinking cheap wine, and I spilled everything. The mortgage, the bills, the endless cycle. She stared at me with wide eyes and said, "Clara, they are using you. You cannot keep doing this. Families help each other sometimes, not forever." I defended them, said Dad had lost his job, said Vanessa was still young, said Mom needed support. Rachel shook her head and told me flat out that it was abuse. The word hung in the air like a curse. Abuse. I could not accept it then. I still wanted to believe sacrifice would earn me love. The years blurred together. Semester after semester, shift after shift. My life became a pattern of studying, working, and funneling money to Frank and Carol. I lost track of birthdays, missed out on outings with classmates, skipped spring breaks. While my peers posted photos from trips and parties, I was scrubbing cafe counters and wiring money. Sometimes I fantasized about cutting them off. I imagined myself clicking cancel on the automatic payments, closing my laptop, and walking away. But then my phone would buzz with another message from Mom about an overdue bill or a new emergency, and the fantasy collapsed. The pressure built slowly but relentlessly. I began to resent the sound of my own phone vibrating. I dreaded family dinners because they always ended with new demands. Once, Frank even handed me a stack of envelopes during Thanksgiving, muttering that since I was the smart one, I could figure out which bills to pay first. I wanted to hurl the envelopes back at him. Instead, I sorted them while the smell of turkey filled the air. By the time I was 21, the total had passed 100,000. I knew because I kept counting. The number haunted me at night when I tried to sleep. $100,000 that could have gone to savings, to investments, to a future. Instead, it was swallowed by a household that never said thank you. I kept telling myself it would end when Vanessa was old enough to contribute, but deep down I knew the truth. She was being groomed to expect rescue forever. The burden would always fall to me. Sometimes I thought about my real dad, about what he would say if he saw how things turned out. He worked himself to death to provide. Would he be proud that I was carrying on his legacy of sacrifice, or horrified that I was being drained by people who did not love me? I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, the spreadsheets burned into my mind, the numbers screaming louder than any words. Then came the night Frank stumbled drunk into my apartment. I had given him a spare key years earlier for emergencies. He used it like a weapon. He demanded money, slurring that his credit card was overdue. When I refused, he shouted that he had raised me, that I owed him. I called Rachel in tears after he left, and she begged me to change the locks. I did, but I kept sending money anyway. The cycle was stronger than my fear. That was how deep the conditioning went. By 22, the total hit nearly 200,000. The weight was crushing me. My grades slipped. Professors noticed I was distracted. My manager at the cafe asked if I was okay. I lied every time. At home, the demands only grew. Frank wanted new tools. Vanessa wanted designer clothes. Mom wanted peace and insisted that giving them what they asked was the only way to keep the family together. Every payment felt like a piece of my soul leaving. Yet I kept going. 35,000 a year, year after year, until the total reached 280,000. That number is seared into me like a brand. It represents not only money, but time, health, and pieces of myself I will never get back. I kept hoping for gratitude. What I got instead was contempt. Christmas Eve should have been a night of warmth, laughter, and family. That was the image I held in my mind while carrying a tray of cookies and a bottle of cheap wine into my mother's house on the south side of San Antonio. The neighborhood was alive with twinkling lights strung across porches, children running with sparklers, and carols playing faintly from radios. Inside our house, however, the air felt heavy thick with the tension I had learned to recognize long before anyone else could. I knew that one wrong word, one misplaced refusal, could ignite Frank's temper. Relatives had gathered from across Texas. My Aunt Margaret had driven in from Dallas with her husband. My Uncle Henry had come down from Houston. Our neighbor, Mr. Lopez, stood in the kitchen chatting politely. The table was crowded with tamales, ham casseroles, and pies. It looked like a perfect holiday gathering on the surface. Yet beneath it was the same rot that had been poisoning us for years. Frank sat in his recliner nursing a glass of whiskey. His broad shoulders slouched, his face flushed. Mom moved around the room too quickly, her smile brittle, her laugh forced. Vanessa sparkled in a new dress and showed off a brand new Coach purse worth $500. She spun around to display it, her voice rising above the chatter as she bragged about her gift. My tray of cookies went unnoticed on the counter. Nobody asked about the double shifts I had worked to afford even that small contribution. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to get through the evening without incident. But peace never lasts long in a house where one man controls everything with his temper. After dinner, Frank called me over. His eyes were bloodshot, his tone sharp. He told me he needed $1,200 to cover another debt, that I had to handle it. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. I heard Vanessa's giggle in the corner, already assuming I would say yes. For years, I had nodded, opened my account, and paid. But something inside me cracked. My voice shook, but I said no. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Aunt Margaret froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Uncle Henry lowered his glass. Even Mr. Lopez stopped mid-sentence. My mother's face went pale. Frank's expression twisted red, rising up his neck. He leaned forward, gripping the glass tighter. "You will do it," he hissed. I shook my head again. "No, I cannot. I will not." Then it happened. His arm moved so fast I barely registered it. The glass in his hand flew through the air and shattered against my face. Pain exploded hot and sharp as shards cut into my cheek and lip. Blood ran down my chin onto my sweater. Gasps filled the room. The world tilted and I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my face. The sting of alcohol from the whiskey burned in the wounds. My vision blurred with tears. I will never forget what my mother did next. She did not rush to me. She did not grab a towel or shout at Frank. She folded her arms and said coldly, "Stop being dramatic, Clara. Do not ruin Christmas." Her voice was louder than the pounding of my heart. It was colder than the tile floor beneath me as I fell to my knees. In that moment, the truth hit harder than the glass. My mother had chosen her husband and her perfect night over her bleeding daughter. Aunt Margaret cried out and rushed to my side. Mr. Lopez moved quickly, pressing napkins against my face. My Uncle Henry cursed under his breath. I heard Vanessa mutter something about me always seeking attention. The room spun as the pain grew sharper, blood seeping through the napkins. Someone called for help. Margaret grabbed her keys, insisting she would drive me. Within minutes, I was in the back seat of her car, the lights of San Antonio blurring past through a haze of pain. At Baptist Medical Center, the nurse looked horrified as I walked in holding blood-soaked napkins to my face. She led me straight to a treatment room where a doctor examined the cuts. I needed 5 stitches, 2 inside my lip, 3 across my cheek. Each stitch tugged at the wound, pulling the skin together while tears streamed down my temples. Margaret held my hand, whispering that I was brave, that none of this was my fault. I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. My own mother had let me bleed and had not followed me to the hospital. Not once did she call to check if I was alive. The doctor asked if I wanted to report what had happened. I hesitated. Years of conditioning screamed at me to protect the family. I shook my head and said I had slipped, that the glass broke accidentally. He gave me a look that told me he did not believe me but respected my choice. As he bandaged my cheek, he said softly, "Accidents do not usually look this way." His words lodged in my chest like another shard of glass. When I returned home later that night, my face swollen and stitched, the house was quiet. The relatives had left. The lights still twinkled, but the warmth was gone. Frank was nowhere in sight. Mom sat on the couch scrolling her phone. She glanced at me at the bandage, then back at her screen. I asked why she had not come. She shrugged. "Someone had to keep the night from falling apart," she said. "If I had run off to the hospital with you, what would the neighbors have thought?" That was her excuse. Appearances over her daughter's safety. I walked to my old room and sat on the bed, staring at the walls that had once held posters of medical diagrams and nursing textbooks. Blood still stained the collar of my sweater. My cheek throbbed with each heartbeat. I realized that night that my childhood had truly ended. There was no more pretending, no more hoping that they would change. The girl who once believed that sacrifice could earn love was gone. In her place stood someone who had finally seen the truth. The explosion of that Christmas Eve was more than an act of violence. It was the unveiling of reality. The mask of family had slipped. My mother's loyalty was to Frank and Vanessa, not to me. My role had always been the provider, the background worker, the silent mule. That night, I became the bleeding reminder that even mules collapse when overloaded. But collapse was not the end. As I sat in that room with stitches pulling at my skin, rage grew inside me. Not the kind of rage that leads to more violence, but the cold, clear rage that fuels decisions. I thought about the spreadsheets, the months of transfers, the endless bills. $280,000. I thought about the times I had skipped meals, the times I had missed out on life to pay for theirs. I thought about the way my mother had looked at me bleeding and told me not to ruin Christmas. And I knew. The end had arrived. The next morning, the house buzzed with holiday cheer again, as if nothing had happened. Vanessa opened more gifts. Mom hummed in the kitchen. Frank nursed his hangover. But I watched them with new eyes. Every smile looked false, every laugh empty. They believed I would continue to fund their lives. They believed my silence would hold forever. They had no idea that the stitches on my cheek were not just closing wounds. They were sealing a vow. I would never give them another cent. That night, as fireworks popped in the distance and church bells rang across the city, I packed my bag. I slipped out quietly, carrying only what I could. Each step away from that house felt like lifting a stone off my chest. The bleeding had stopped, but the fire inside me burned brighter than ever. They had taken my money, my time, my strength. But they would not take my future. Christmas Eve had been their victory for a moment. But from that night forward, the story was mine. The morning after Christmas felt colder than usual in San Antonio. The winter sun was pale through the blinds, and the air in the Dawson house carried the sharp smell of leftover ham mixed with stale alcohol. My cheek throbbed beneath its stitches, every pulse a reminder of what had happened the night before. Frank sat in his recliner nursing a hangover. Vanessa scrolled her phone curled up on the couch in new pajamas. My mother hummed in the kitchen as if nothing had happened, as if her daughter had not been taken to urgent care with blood dripping from her face. The absurdity of it tightened something inside me until I could barely breathe. I had come back to the house for one reason only, to gather my belongings. But as I walked through the doorway bag slung over my shoulder, I heard laughter from the living room. Frank was bragging to Uncle Henry about how family always pulled together, about how real loyalty meant everyone knew their role. The words crawled across my skin. My role. The silent provider. The one who bled quietly so the rest could keep pretending. No more. I stood in the middle of the room, pulling out my phone. The chatter faded as relatives noticed the bandage across my cheek, the fresh bruises blooming beneath my eye. Aunt Margaret's face pinched with anger, her hands gripping the arm of her chair. Mr. Lopez, the neighbor who had driven me to urgent care, folded his arms across his chest. They all knew what had happened, even if nobody had said it out loud. And I decided then that silence would end today. I tapped the screen and opened the spreadsheet I had been building for years. Column after column of numbers stretched across it, dates, amounts, categories. I cleared my throat. For 8 years, I said I have been paying for this household, mortgage, utilities, insurance, Frank's credit card debt, Vanessa's shopping and car. I paused, making sure my voice carried. The total is $280,000. Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret's eyes widened. Henry muttered something sharp under his breath. Even Vanessa looked up from her phone, her mouth open. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face flushing red. Mom appeared in the doorway, her smile collapsing. "Clara," she warned, "put that away. Do not embarrass the family. Embarrass the family." That phrase ignited the fire inside me. I held my phone higher, scrolling through line after line. Mortgage $1,200 each month. Utilities $500. Insurance $300. Frank's credit cards $600. Vanessa's luxuries $400. Month after month. Year after year. $35,000 annually, all from me. I looked around the room, my eyes meeting each stunned face. That is what I sacrificed while he drank, while she looked away, while my sister flaunted her gifts online. Frank surged forward in his chair, pointing a trembling finger. "You do not belong here," he barked. "You are ungrateful. Without me, you would be nothing." My laugh cracked like glass. "Without you, I would be free. Without you, I might actually have savings. Without you, I might have a life." Mom's voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You are just jealous of your sister. You always have been. Vanessa deserves nice things. She is sensitive. You are strong. You can handle it." I turned to her, rage and heartbreak colliding. "No, Mom. I am not strong. I am broken. I am bleeding, stitched together because your husband threw glass at me and you told me not to ruin Christmas. You think I am jealous of Vanessa. I am not jealous. I am done. Done being your mule. Done being your ATM." The room was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. Aunt Margaret stood slowly, tears in her eyes. She faced my mother, her voice trembling with fury. "She has been working doubles for years while you drank and spent. She has been paying your bills while you bragged about loyalty." "I am ashamed of you, Carol. Deeply ashamed." Henry shook his head, muttering about disgrace. Mr. Lopez, quiet until now, spoke firmly. "I saw her bleeding on my front seat last night. I saw you let her leave without a word. Everyone here knows the truth." Frank's face twisted with rage. "Get out!" he roared. "If you do not like how we run things, get out. You are no daughter of mine." His words were meant to wound. Instead, they freed me. I smiled bitterly. Finally, something we agree on. I am not your daughter. I never was. I slung my bag over my shoulder, the weight surprisingly light. The spreadsheet still glowed on my phone as I turned to the room one last time. You all heard the numbers. You all saw what happened. Do not ask me to stay silent again. I am finished paying. I am finished bleeding. From this day forward, I belong to myself. I walked out the front door into the crisp December night. The air smelled of wood smoke and faintly of fireworks from the Riverwalk. My cheek throbbed beneath the stitches, but the pain felt different now. Not a wound, but a seal closing the chapter of my life that had been defined by sacrifice. Behind me, voices rose, angry, ashamed, confused. Ahead of me, the city stretched wide, glittering with lights. For years, I had been trapped inside that house, believing love could be earned through suffering. In one night, the illusion shattered. The confrontation was not planned, but it was inevitable. The silence had ended. The truth was spoken. And in that truth, I finally found the first taste of freedom. The night of the confrontation, I left my mother's house with a fire in my chest and stitches pulling tight against my cheek. I walked through the streets of San Antonio with my bag over my shoulder, the December air stinging my skin. For the first time in years, I was not weighed down by guilt. I was fueled by clarity. They had stolen my money, my strength, my dignity. That would end tonight. When I reached my small apartment on the northwest side, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing deeply. My place smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, so different from the stale alcohol and tension that clung to my mother's house. This space was mine, paid for by my own hands. No one else had a claim to it. I set my bag down, opened my laptop, and pulled up my online banking account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. The first thing I did was cancel every auto payment tied to their household. Mortgage gone, utilities gone, insurance gone, internet and phone gone. I removed myself as an authorized payer from every account I had been foolish enough to attach my name to. Each click felt like severing a chain. For years, I had been bound by invisible links of obligation and fear. Now, one by one, I snapped them. By the time I was done, the Dawson household was cut off completely. Next, I drafted emails. To the mortgage company, to the utility providers, to the insurance office. The words were cold precise. I will no longer be financially responsible for this account. Remove my name immediately. All payments made by me have ceased as of today. If further communication is required, direct it to Frank Dawson or Carol Dawson. Hitting send on each email was like dropping a weight from my shoulders. My phone buzzed almost instantly. Missed calls, voicemails. At first, from Mom, then from Frank, then from Vanessa. I ignored them. I watched as the notifications piled up 50, 60, 70 calls in the span of hours. I let the phone vibrate on the counter until it finally went silent. For once, I held the power. The next morning, chaos erupted in their house. I know this not because I was there, but because neighbors texted me. Mr. Lopez sent a simple message. They lost power today. Everyone saw. Then another Carol is in tears. Frank is yelling in the yard. Vanessa is screaming about her phone dying. I pictured it clearly, the lights out, the water off, the internet gone. The life they had built on my back crumbling in real time. It was not joy I felt, but justice. By noon, Mom left me a voicemail, her voice raw with desperation. Clara, please, just this once, help us get through. Your sister needs her car. Frank needs his medication. We cannot manage without you. My jaw clenched as I replayed the message. I remembered her voice from Christmas Eve telling me not to ruin the night, telling me to stop being dramatic while I bled. Now she begged, but it rang hollow. She had chosen Frank and Vanessa over me. She had chosen appearances over truth. Frank's voicemail was different. His voice was slurred with rage. "You ungrateful brat," he shouted. "After all I have done for you, this is how you repay me. You will come crawling back. You always do." His confidence was misplaced. For the first time, I felt nothing but contempt. He had done nothing for me but take, and I was done crawling. Vanessa's message was the most telling. She screamed about how her friends would laugh when they found out the internet was cut off, how she could not charge her phone, how her life was ruined. Not once did she mention me or what I had suffered. To her, my worth had always been in what I provided. Without that, I was nothing. And I was fine with that. The days that followed were filled with silence on my end. I did not respond. I did not check in. I focused on myself. For the first time in years, my paycheck went directly into my own account without being siphoned off. I bought groceries without calculating what would be left for Frank's credit cards. I paid my rent without the shadow of a mortgage I did not own. I even allowed myself a small indulgence, a second-hand jacket from a thrift store warm and sturdy. It felt like luxury compared to the empty envelopes I used to hand over. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. People whispered in the pews at church and the aisles of the grocery store. Everyone knew about the Christmas Eve incident, about the stitches, about the confrontation. Some were sympathetic to my mother, saying she was caught in a difficult marriage. Others were horrified by her silence. Almost all agreed that I had done the right thing by walking away. For once, the court of public opinion was on my side. Meanwhile, the Dawson household spiraled. Uncle Henry called to tell me Frank had been barred from his favorite bar after getting into a drunken fight. Aunt Margaret said Carol broke down crying at a family gathering, admitting she did not know how to pay the bills. Vanessa blasted me on Facebook, calling me selfish and heartless, but her friends commented back that I had paid for her car repairs, her shopping trips, even her gas money. The truth was out, and no amount of online whining could cover it. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought cutting them off would weigh on me. Instead, I felt light freer than I had in years. Each day without a phone call answered, each paycheck, kept each meal eaten without shame, added bricks to the foundation of my new life. The stitches in my cheek itched as they healed, and I welcomed the discomfort. It was proof that wounds close, that bodies recover, that scars can be worn as armor. One evening, about a week after the cutoff, Mom appeared outside my apartment. I saw her through the peephole, her face drawn and tired. She knocked softly, calling my name. "Clara, please, I just want to talk." For a moment, my heart wavered. She was still my mother. I almost opened the door. Then I remembered her voice on Christmas Eve, sharp and dismissive, telling me not to ruin the holiday as I bled. I remembered the years of sacrifice that had been met with silence. I stepped back from the door and let her knock until she gave up. She left a note tucked under the mat. It read, "We need you. Please come home." I tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. That was the final confirmation. I was not needed for love, for family, for belonging. I was needed as a resource, a wallet, a scapegoat. Without that role, they did not know what to do with me, and I was fine with that. In cutting them off, I discovered something I had not felt in years: peace. It was not immediate. It came in small waves, the quiet hum of my own apartment, the steady deposit of paychecks into my untouched account, the silence of a phone no longer vibrating with demands. I filled that silence with music, with laughter from classmates, with long walks along the Riverwalk at sunset. Slowly, I began to feel like a person again instead of a provider. The cutoff was not just financial, it was emotional. It was the line in the sand that said, "You cannot take from me anymore." Every decision I made after that night was for me, not for them. They had taken enough. Now I was taking back my life. News travels quickly in San Antonio, especially in neighborhoods where people know each other's business better than their own. Within days of Christmas, the story had spread far beyond our block. The whispers started in the Mission District, carried into church pews, grocery store lines, and even the waiting room of the dental office where my mom worked. Everyone had heard some version of it: the stepfather who threw a glass, the daughter with stitches, the mother who turned away the spreadsheet that exposed $280,000. Each retelling added fuel to the fire, and for once the flames were not burning me. At first, I braced myself for backlash. I thought people might call me selfish or accuse me of abandoning family. That fear came from years of conditioning, of being told I was the strong one, the reliable one, the one who could handle it. But the reaction surprised me. Aunt Margaret called to say she had never been prouder of me. Uncle Henry muttered that someone had finally stood up to Frank. Even Mr. Lopez, usually reserved, told me the entire neighborhood had seen enough and that it was about time I took my life back. Their words landed like balm on wounds I did not realize were still open. For the first time, I felt validated. Meanwhile, the Dawson household unraveled. Without my money flowing and bills piled up fast, the mortgage company sent warnings. The utility companies shut off services. The insurance lapsed. I heard through relatives that Frank stormed around to the house in drunken rages, demanding to know how they would survive without me. Carol cried at work when coworkers asked why her daughter had stitches on her face and why the lights at her house were off. She told them it was complicated, but people are not stupid. They whispered anyway, their eyes full of judgment. Frank's pride took the hardest hit. He had spent years portraying himself as the man in charge, the one holding the family together. Now everyone saw the truth. At the bar where he used to brag about his glory days as a foreman, the whispers followed him. Some men stopped inviting him to their tables. Others mocked him openly, saying he had lost control of his own house to a 19-year-old girl. The humiliation stung worse than any financial struggle. He picked fights, got thrown out more than once, and eventually his reputation collapsed. Vanessa reacted the way only a spoiled teenager could. She blasted me on Facebook, posting long rants about how heartless I was, how I had abandoned my family for money, how I thought I was better than everyone else. But social media has a way of backfiring when the truth is out. Her friends commented that they remembered me paying for her gas for her car repairs for her shopping trips. One even wrote that she had bragged about me covering her bills. The more she posted, the more people called her ungrateful. Eventually, she stopped posting about me altogether, though I heard she complained in private that her life was ruined without unlimited internet and a steady flow of money. Carol tried to maintain appearances the longest. She smiled at church, carried casseroles to potlucks, and acted as though nothing had changed. But whispers trailed her everywhere. People asked how she could have stood still while her daughter bled. They asked how she could allow a child to carry the financial weight of an entire household. The shame ate at her until even she could not keep up the facade. She started missing church events. At work, she overheard colleagues gossiping in hushed tones about her choices. Slowly, her circle of friends shrank. I did not gloat. I did not dance on their downfall. I simply lived my life quietly while theirs collapsed. But inside me, there was a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance being restored. For years, I had been the one to sacrifice, to bend until I broke. Now the consequences were theirs to bear. The most telling moment came a month later. I was walking through H-E-B after a shift when I spotted Carol near the produce aisle. She looked thinner, her hair less styled, her clothes wrinkled. She saw me and froze. For a moment, I expected her to approach to apologize, to beg again. Instead, she turned her cart sharply and disappeared into another aisle. That avoidance told me more than words ever could. She could not face me because to face me was to face the truth. There were nights when guilt crept in. I would lie awake wondering if they were cold in that dark house, if Vanessa was struggling at school without internet, if my mother cried alone. The old instinct to rescue stirred in me. But then I touched the scar on my cheek, a permanent reminder of that Christmas Eve, and the guilt faded. They had made their choices. I was not responsible for cleaning up their mess anymore. The community made its judgment clear. At gatherings with relatives, people pulled me aside to whisper their support. At church, older women clasped my hands and told me I was brave. Even professors at school who had heard some version of the story offered quiet words of encouragement. "You deserve better," they said. "Focus on your future." Each word stitched another piece of strength into me. Frank, Carol, and Vanessa were left to face what they had built. They had burned the bridge to their provider, and now they stood stranded. Frank's drinking worsened. Carol's social standing crumbled. Vanessa sulked in isolation. The house that had once demanded my money became a prison of their own making. And I, for the first time, was free. I will not pretend it was easy. Walking away carried its own weight. I battled guilt, nightmares, and moments of doubt. But the consequences were necessary. Without them, they would never understand what they had lost. Without them, I would never understand what I deserved. That was the aftermath of cutting them off. Not a neat ending with apologies and reconciliation, but a messy unraveling of the toxic web that had trapped me for so long. They fell apart and I rebuilt. They faced consequences and I found freedom. That balance was enough. When I walked out of that house on Christmas Eve, blood drying on my cheek and my stepfather's roar still echoing in my ears, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. Freedom is not just the absence of chains. It is learning how to move without them. For weeks after I cut off every account, my phone buzzed with missed calls and messages, each one a test of my resolve. There were nights I stared at the screen, tempted to pick up and soothe the guilt that clawed at me. But then I touched the scar near my mouth, the one that pulled slightly when I smiled, and I remembered the truth. Love does not leave you bleeding on the kitchen floor. The first small taste of real independence came in January. I opened my online banking, and for the first time in 8 years, every dollar in my account belonged to me. No mortgage siphoned out automatically, no utility drafts, no insurance premiums disappearing before I could blink. It was like inhaling after years of shallow breaths. I cooked a simple dinner in my tiny apartment, lit a candle I had been saving, and ate slowly at my second-hand table. That meal tasted richer than any feast I had funded for them. School became my anchor. Nursing had always been more than a degree. It was a promise I had made to myself that I would build a life of service but not sacrifice. With no money draining into Frank's credit card or Vanessa's shopping trips, I finally had the resources to focus fully. My professors noticed the change. I was more alert in class, more confident in labs, less distracted by buzzing texts. In March, I applied for a competitive scholarship through UT Health San Antonio and won. When the letter arrived, I sat on my bed and cried, not because I needed the money desperately anymore, but because it was validation. My effort was being recognized on its own merits, not stolen or overlooked. Therapy was another turning point. A flyer on the bulletin board at school advertised a support group for survivors of family violence. At first, I tore it down, angry at the label. Survivor. It felt too dramatic, too heavy. But weeks later, after another nightmare where glass shattered in slow motion across my face, I called the number. The first night I walked into that church basement in downtown San Antonio, I expected to feel out of place. Instead, I found a circle of chairs filled with people whose eyes carried the same haunted knowledge as mine. There was Maria, who had left a husband after 30 years. There was Marcus, who had cut ties with siblings who drained him dry. There was Linda, who had lost her credit score to loans she co-signed under pressure. As we shared stories, I realized I was not alone. Every nod, every tear, every quiet word of encouragement stitched me back together. My therapist, Dr. Thompson, taught me a sentence that changed everything. Healthy families do not require one member to sacrifice their future for everyone else's comfort. It echoed in my head for weeks. Each time guilt whispered that I had abandoned them, I countered it with those words. I was not abandoning anyone. I was protecting myself from a cycle that thrived on my self-destruction. As spring warmed San Antonio, I began to notice beauty again. I walked along the river walk, not as a tired provider with groceries in both hands, but as a young woman with time to breathe. I stopped at cafes with classmates, joined study groups, even bought myself a pair of sneakers that were not from the discount rack. Small things maybe, but each one was a declaration I matter too. In April, I moved into a small condo near the Pearl District. It was not luxurious, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I chose every detail. I painted the walls a soft blue. I bought plants and watched them stretch toward the sun, a daily reminder that growth happens quietly but surely. I hung fairy lights on the balcony and spent evenings listening to the sounds of the city below, feeling like I was finally part of the world instead of trapped behind the walls of Frank's house. It was at a medical conference in Chicago that my story took another unexpected turn. I had scraped together the funds to attend, eager to learn and connect with others in the field. On the second day, while waiting in line for coffee, I met Michael Torres. He was 24, an intern in architecture with an easy smile and kind eyes. We struck up a conversation about the terrible hotel coffee, and before I knew it, we were sitting together through the keynote lecture. Over the next 3 days, we talked about everything from our favorite books to the scars we carried from family. On the last night, he listened quietly as I told him about San Antonio, about the glass, about the $280,000. I expected him to recoil. Instead, he reached across the table and said, "That's not family. That's exploitation with a blood tie. Real family celebrates your success instead of draining it." His words settled into me like truth I had been waiting my whole life to hear. Back in San Antonio, we kept talking. Long phone calls turned into visits. For the first time, I experienced what it felt like to be seen without conditions. Michael did not need my money, my sacrifice, or my silence. He simply wanted my presence. I was learning that love could be steady, not violent, generous, not draining. Meanwhile, the Dawson household kept unraveling. I did not watch closely, but news trickled back. They lost the house by June. Frank took a night job as a security guard. Carol added hours at the dental office, her smile forced and brittle. Vanessa's friends drifted away, tired of her complaints. They lived in a cramped apartment far from the neighborhood where people whispered about their downfall. I did not celebrate their suffering, but I did not rescue them either. Consequences had finally found them, and I was no longer the shield. By summer, I felt lighter. Therapy had helped me untangle the guilt. School gave me purpose. Michael gave me companionship. The scar on my cheek remained, but instead of shame, I began to see it as a reminder, a line drawn in flesh marking where I had ended one life and begun another. One evening in July, I stood on the riverwalk as fireworks bloomed over the water. Crowds cheered, the reflections painted the surface gold and red, and for the first time in years I felt peace. Not the fragile peace of keeping everyone else happy, but the sturdy peace of knowing I had chosen myself. I thought about the little girl who once envied her sister's gifts, the teenager who worked double shifts, the young woman who bled on Christmas Eve. I wanted to tell her, you made it. You are free. The most important lesson I carried into the future was simple. You cannot sacrifice your way into someone's love. Real family is not defined by DNA, but by who shows up when you bleed, who stands beside you when you succeed, who celebrates your joy without resentment. So if you are listening to my story, if you have ever felt used by people who call themselves family, I want you to hear this. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for saying no. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let others face the weight of their own choices. Breaking free is terrifying, but on the other side of that fear is a life where you are finally allowed to grow. That is the life I am building now. A life of healing, of independence, of love that does not demand blood or money as proof. A life where the fireworks of San Antonio mark not just holidays, but the steady beat of my own rebirth. When I look back on everything that happened, the glass, the stitches, the scar that will never fully fade, the money I'll never get back, I realize that my story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever been made to feel like their worth was tied only to what they could provide. It's about anyone who has sat in a quiet room questioning if love was supposed to hurt this much, if loyalty was supposed to feel like chains instead of wings. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you've asked yourself the same questions. I know what it's like to carry the guilt of saying no. I know what it's like to be told that being strong means you have to be silent. That because you're capable, you're obligated. Maybe you've been the one who always covers the bills. Maybe you've been the one who swallows your own needs so someone else can chase their chaos. Maybe you've been the one bleeding literally or figuratively while the people who should have protected you turned their backs. If you've ever lived in that cycle, I want to tell you something that I wish someone had told me years ago. You are not wrong for wanting peace. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not ungrateful for choosing yourself. That voice inside you that whispers, "This isn't love," is telling the truth. And no amount of money, no amount of sacrifice, no amount of silence will ever turn exploitation into love. When I finally cut off my family, people called me brave. But I don't think of it as bravery. I think of it as survival. Because the truth is, if I had stayed, if I had kept pouring out money and energy and blood, I would have lost myself completely. And maybe that's where you are right now, standing at the edge of a decision that terrifies you, but also promises you freedom. If you are, I hope my story can be the push you need to step forward. I also know that cutting ties is not neat. It's messy. People will talk. Neighbors will whisper. Family will rage. Guilt will gnaw at you in the dark. But here's the truth. I learned those consequences belong to them, not you. You didn't create their dependence. You didn't force them to exploit you. You didn't choose their violence. They did. And if they suffer when you stop enabling that suffering is the natural outcome of their own decisions, it is not your burden to carry. I share these details, the dollar amounts, the hospital stitches, the ugly words shouted across a living room, not to shock you, but to remind you that these stories are real. Abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like bills in your name, loans you didn't sign up for, emotional manipulation disguised as loyalty. Sometimes it looks like being told to be quiet while you bleed. And those wounds, the invisible ones, can last longer than stitches. That's why I'm telling you this now. If my story resonates with you, don't keep it inside. Speak it. Share it. Comment down below. Tell me if you've lived through something similar. Because when we speak our stories, we break the silence that abusers depend on. We build a community where people realize they're not alone. And let me tell you, realizing you're not alone is the first step toward healing. I want you to think about your own life. Where have you been told to stay quiet? Where have you been told to keep giving even when it hurts? Whose comfort has been built on your exhaustion? And what would happen if you stopped, really stopped? Would they call you selfish? Would they rage? Would they guilt you? Yes, probably. But would you finally have room to breathe? Yes, absolutely. When I finally stopped, the world didn't end. The house fell apart, yes. Their comfort collapsed, yes. But my life began. My healing began. And if you're standing on that edge wondering what it might look like for you, I want you to imagine the freedom. Imagine logging into your bank account and seeing money that's yours. Imagine waking up without dread of another demand. Imagine walking into your own home, small, imperfect, but yours, and feeling peace instead of fear. That future exists, and it starts the moment you choose yourself. So here's where I turn to you. If this story struck something inside you, if you felt your chest tighten at certain moments, if you saw yourself in my words, I want you to engage. Not just for me, but for yourself. Hit that like button. It's not just about numbers. It's about telling yourself and others that these stories matter. Drop a comment, even if it's just a single sentence about your own experience, because every comment becomes another voice in a chorus saying, "We are not alone." And subscribe not because it's routine, but because we're building something here. A space where stories of survival and boundary setting and hard-earned freedom can live, so the next person who feels trapped knows where to turn. Think about the people who need to hear this. Maybe it's a friend who's stuck in a toxic relationship. Maybe it's a cousin who's always bailing out family. Maybe it's an older neighbor who quietly suffers in silence. Share this video with them. Send them the link. Because sometimes all it takes is one story, one scar, one moment of recognition to give someone the courage to step out of their own prison. And let me be clear, I'm not saying walking away is easy. It will break your heart. It will make you question everything you believed about family. It will leave you crying in the dark, wondering if you did the right thing. But on the other side of that heartbreak is a life where you are finally safe. And that, I promise you, is worth every tear. To those of you who are older, maybe in your 50s or 60s watching this and thinking, "It's too late for me," it is not. Healing is not bound by age. I've met women who walked out of toxic marriages at 65 and found joy in 70. I've met men who stopped funding selfish children and finally traveled the world at retirement. It is never too late to say enough. It is never too late to choose yourself. To those of you who are younger, maybe just starting your adult life, I hope my story saves you years of pain. Learn from me. Boundaries are not cruelty. Saying no is not betrayal. If someone's love depends on what you can give them financially or emotionally, that is not love. That is control. And the earlier you recognize it, the earlier you can step into freedom. So here's what I'm asking. Right now, before you click away, before you move on with your day, engage. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had to cut off toxic family. Tell me the moment you realized love shouldn't hurt. And then subscribe. Because the more of us there are sharing these truths, the harder it becomes for abusers to hide behind silence. I will keep telling these stories. I will keep pulling back the curtain on what family dysfunction really looks like. I will keep reminding you that survival is possible, that rebirth is possible, that peace is possible. But I need you to be part of it. I need you to add your voice. I need you to share these videos, comment on them, push them into the world where someone else might stumble across them on the night they need it most. Think about this: if even one person finds this video at midnight, sitting in a room they pay for while their family drains them, and hears me say, "You are not wrong for wanting peace," then everything I went through will mean something. You can be part of that. By liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing, you become part of a lifeline for someone else. So don't just watch, act, speak, engage, because silence protects abusers, but voices protect survivors, and together our voices are louder. And finally, I'll ask you this: what's your story? What's the moment that changed everything for you? Was it a slammed door, a cruel word, an empty bank account, a broken holiday? Whatever it was, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments, because your story matters just as much as mine. And if you're still in the middle of it, still bleeding metaphorically or literally, still trying to gather the courage to walk away, hold on. Keep listening. Keep watching. Keep believing that you deserve more. Because one day you will tell your story, and when you do, I'll be here to listen. So hit like, comment, subscribe, share. Not for me, not for the algorithm, but for yourself and for the next person who needs to know they are not alone. Together we are building something stronger than silence. Together we are rewriting what family means. Because in the end, this isn't just my rebirth, it can be yours too.